And good evening, everybody. This is Dr. John Michael Salvato. You are watching The Brew, a weekly program where we try to bring you some insight, culture, information, and some great interviews relative to the interests and culture of queer pagan spirituality, news, and events. And I'm really excited because at this time of year, as for many of you, it's my favorite time of year. And just 2 weeks from now, it'll be Samhain, the cross-quarter day when the ancients in cultures around the world believe that the veil begins to thin. And in some cultures, including the cultures of the ancient Romans and the Etruscans, we find and believed that the door to the underworld itself was opening. So what about you? Are you ready to go deeper into the underworld? Because we're going to do that when we come back. And we are back, and welcome to those who are watching this for the first time. This is the point where I always have to remember to pull up the comments. If you're watching for the first time, go ahead and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're a regular viewer, just say hello so that we know who's here, who's tuning in. And if you're watching on the replay, go ahead and drop replay in the comments as well. Guys, I'm excited tonight because my guest is somebody that many of you might remember from a previous show, and I thought this was a perfect time to have him back. Chris Allaun has been Chris, did I say your last name right?
It's Chris Allaun.
Allaun, okay.
Yeah.
I just have a tendency to make things harder than they really are. Chris has been studying witchcraft and magic and paganism since 1992. He's one of the founders and an ordained minister with the Fellowship of the Phoenix. He's also been an initiate of tradcraft since 2002, is a Native American pipe carrier and studies that path of the path of the Red Road. He teaches classes and workshops on magic and healing and shamanism, necromancy, and so much more. And tonight, one of the particular reasons we wanted him to be here is that Chris is the author of Underworld, Shamanism, Myth, and Magic, deeper into the underworld, death, ancestors, and magic rites, and his newest book, Upperworld, Shamanism and Magic of the Celestial Realms. And if you haven't read these books, I really encourage you to do so, because Chris continues to study and teach the magical arts to anyone who is seeking more balance in the three worlds in their own lives. And what better time to talk about that than here on the brink of Samhain, and for those who also observe Halloween or Hallowmass, the Day of the Dead, All Saints, All Souls, you name it. This is an exciting time, I think, for us to have you here. So, Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having me again on the show.
It's been probably I don't know, probably about 6 months or so since we had you on last.
Wow.
And since that time, I've had a chance to dive in a little more deeper into your books.
Yeah.
And for me personally, my definite favorite has been Deeper into the Underworld, because just because of my own path and the books. It was really hard as I was getting ready to put the interview stuff together for today. There were so many questions that I realized that we try to keep these between 45 minutes and an hour long. And if I would have gotten to all of the questions in my head, this probably would have been a workshop series. So in your book, we'll jump right in and say that, first of all, did I leave anything out in your background? Anything important that you want to tell us?
I don't think so.
Oh, awesome.
Good.
So in your book, I just almost lost that question. In Deeper into the Underworld, you talk about the need to go deeper into the underworld, thus the title, where we discover who our ancestors are and how to bring them into our world once again, not just to help us with our magic, but to help one another for sort of a mutual assistance. Could you explain that first of all? What do you mean by we help them and they help us?
So, uh, a lot of cultures believe that the ancestors, um, you know, being that they're spirits, they have a whole lot of access to the energy of the earth, life force, so forth. And so when we give the ancestors offerings, energy, prayers, things like that, those offerings help the ancestors manifest easier in the physical plane. When they're able to manifest on the physical plane, they can bring with them spiritual energies, dragon energies. When I say dragon energies, I mean energies of the of the earth. And in China, they have something called the bone men or the bone people, and the dragon people. And what that is that these feng shui experts, they go and they can tell you if the ancestors on your property are happy and healthy. If they are, they bring the dragon energies of the earth to your home, to your home for healing, for happiness, and, and a good energy. Um, Also, in the spirituality that I follow, you have to have your threes. You have to have you honor the gods, you honor the elves or the fae, and then you honor the ancestors. And only when you have all three, you have balance. And the ancestors, of course, they want us to be happy. They want us to do well. Um, because they're our families, so if they can be our grandparents or our great grandparents or our great 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 grandparents, they're all invested in our lives. So they want to help us. They want us to heal. They want us to be happy. So when you honor the ancestors, then they in turn give you all this great energy and blessings and things.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, when you talk about the three realms, and you talk about the upper world, the world of the gods, the mid world where we experience the fae and the spirits of nature and all that's around us, and of course the underworld where we experience the ancestors. Specific to that underworld, and because of the time of year that it is, a lot of people get a sense, almost a sense of excitement and a sense of exhilaration, and they don't quite really know why, but they just know that they love this time of year. And on a couple of our previous shows, the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about the ancestors, obviously, and how somebody said that they didn't feel like they really could connect to any of their ancestors who were healthy, or positive spiritually. And we told them, at any given point in time, you have an army of ancestors just surrounding you
Right.
and ready to help.
Right.
In your experience and in your practice, your path, do you recognize that ancestors can be ancestors of blood, ancestors of place, and ancestors
Mhm.
of what I call ethos of like your culture, your community, your tribe?
Sure, of course. I mean, so a lot of pagans, when we talk about your ancestors of blood, your ancestors of your spirituality. There's also what ancestors of our vocation. So ancestors of blood, well, that's simple. That's our family. And I've been talking with a whole lot of people who say things like, "Oh, I was adopted. I don't know who my family are," or "I didn't have a good relationship with my father and my grandfather, so I don't want to deal with the ancestors of blood." And I think that's kind of sad because um, just because we didn't have a good relationship with our father or mother and our grandparents, it doesn't mean our other ancestors further back don't care about us, weren't good people, and aren't going to help us because they are. Sometimes we have to go back a few back a few generations. Um, and I'll talk about that in a second, but then we have our ancestors of spirit, and that's our religion, our spiritual views, things like that. And, you know, a lot of us have, we're kind of eclectic. We have different things we follow. Like, so for example, I follow traditional witchcraft. I follow heathenism. I follow a little bit of the Greco-Roman pantheon. So, in my Native American spirituality, I'm also have Native American blood, so I do have the both. But so your ancestors are spirit, and they certainly can be some of the big famous ones, like Doreen Valiente, Gerald Gardner, um, Robert Cochran, and so forth, depending upon your tradition. And a lot of people set up altars to them, and not like a godlike shrine. Is not that at all. So I wouldn't take Crowley, for example, and I wouldn't set up a shrine to him like he's a god, because that's not how I view the ancestors. So what I would do is I would have um, any spiritual teachers who have passed on, or sometimes even their spiritual teachers who taught my teachers. If I choose, I can have an altar that's dedicated to my teachers and so forth. Um, Ancestors of vocation. If you're a priest or a priestess, then your ancestors of spirit and invocation are probably going to be the same thing. But I'm a massage therapist as well, so I can have other healers on my altar. Like, for example, the founder of my massage school here in Chicago, his name is Bob King, and he had passed on a few years ago, and it would be very appropriate for me to put him on the ancestor altar if I choose to have ancestors of vocation on there. And to be honest, when people say, well, how do I choose? Who do I put on there? Whatever you feel, if you have, say you had a childhood friend who helped raise you, or your best friend's family, who you are all kind of like family together, I think it's appropriate to put them on your altar as well. Um, Whatever you feel, to be honest. Um, the only thing I will say to that is, when you're setting up an ancestor shrine, is as long as it feels good, then go ahead and do it. It's fine.
Yeah. And a lot of people have asked as well. And before I ask this question, or make this comment, if you're watching the show and you've got any questions for Chris, please, by all means, put them in the comments, and they will stream up on the control panel here, and I'll be able to put them up on the screen, and direct your questions to Chris, or questions to me, whatever. If you have comments or anything you want to add, feel free to do that as well. But folks have been saying over the last couple of weeks that very thing. Well, how do I know what to put on my ancestral altar? Or do I have to have 3 separate ancestral altars? And really, I think the answer is that you've got to go with what feels right for you.
Exactly.
I have Harvey Milk on my ancestor's altar, and I didn't set up a separate altar for Harvey Milk. That would have actually felt kind of weird.
Yeah.
I have Divine on my friend Glenn Milstead
Awesome.
on an ancestral altar, because he was both a cultural
Hmm.
icon for me, a part of my tribe, but he
Right.
was also a personal friend. And so if there are people or entities, beings that kind of cross over those different categories in your lives, don't worry about it. Stop overthinking it. Would you say
Yeah.
that's the case? And just make, because I think I get the sense, especially from reading your books, that you want to make this personal and intimate because that's what relationships are, right?
Well, was exactly that. The whole point of even having an ancestor shrine or altar is to have a relationship. And everything we do, from having working with the gods, the nature spirits, the ancestors, at the core, it's always about the relationship. Always. So when you're giving offerings, um, if you can't afford flowers and incense and expensive food, you give what you can, because it's about the energy, it's about the intent, it's about the love. So um, it is about developing relationship with the ancestors. One of the things that I think is important, though, as much as you can, it is important to have blood ancestors because it's in our DNA. It's where we come from. However, if some people have a very strong reaction, because I've had several students who their family line needs a lot of healing, and then in the book I actually talk about how to heal ancestral karma and things like that. I give you a journey about how to basically go through your own blood, through your own DNA, and heal your family karma. However, I also don't believe in forcing people to heal until they're in that place that um, they want want to do it. And in case anyone's asking, healing is hard. Healing is challenging. Healing is scary and frightening. So I don't think there's ever a time to truly be 100% gung ho about um, healing family karma, yeah, because you're going to dig up some drama, you're going to dig up some crap, and it's painful. However, as we know, when we get surgery and we reset our bones, and it's to heal us, and it hurts. So sometimes we have to go through the challenging aspect to get the healing. That being said, if you would prefer to put your vocational ancestors or your spiritual ancestors, I think that's completely fine. And a lot of times, I think when we put our spiritual ancestors on our ancestor shrine, they will help us heal just enough to where we can start to do the healing work with our family. So it's kind of like, how our, our physical teachers say, okay, we're going to teach you how to ground, how to do the healing energy. We're going to teach you how to meditate and have self reflection. Our spiritual ancestors, they work on our heart, our energies, our spirit, and so forth, to where we can be strong enough to work on our own ancestral bloodline. So if you really don't want to deal with family things right now, that's okay. At least to the spiritual ancestors. And if you don't know, find out what path calls to you, and find out who, like, for example, again, I know I already mentioned Crowley and Gerald Gardner, and anyone who is a pioneer in your faith, in your religion, even if they've been a little bit disproven, like I know, like archaeologists from the 1800s, it's going to turn this century, a lot of their ideas have been disproven. That's okay. It doesn't mean they didn't do good work and good deeds. And it just means with their findings and education and what they had at the time, that was what they were able to do.
Right.
So it actually kind of, it bums me out whenever I see a historian, an archaeologist, or a spiritual person who did a lot of good things, and when someone brand new says, "Oh, it was a bunch of crap," and everything they said is incorrect. Well, there's truth in everything, and again, maybe the things that I say now, and 200 years for our descendants will evolve in such a way to say, okay, Chris is okay, but we know better now, and that's okay. I'm fine with that too.
That's life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. I mean, because first of all, because it gives us a little more material to talk about, because
Right.
you are one of the things I love about having you on is that you practically interview yourself. So you have covered like three of my next questions,
Right.
and covered them perfectly so that there's not really even any room for any other questions. But I've got a ton more.
Hopefully.
But on that topic that you just brought, I
Yeah.
think that's, because we talk about current events and current culture,
Mhm.
one of the things that was crazy for me the last couple weeks was, well, actually two things. One was the whole conversation that happens every year around this time between the folks who who observe Samhain at the or whatever that you call it in your tradition, at the astrological time of Samhain, compared to those who in the 20th century neo-pagan culture celebrate it at the same time as Halloween. And it was frustrating. Every year we make a little more progress, I think, in that area, where people can say, hey, I mean, Jason Mankey actually responded to one of my posts today, and I was a big old fangirl about it because it was the first time he commented on a post. And we actually have different points of view about that. But I had somebody post on actually on Amazon on one of my latest books.
Okay.
And they just said that, I disrespected Raven Grimassi and I disrespected Leo Martello and Doreen Valiente and Gerald Gardner and Charles Leland. And I had to go back and look at my own book to see if there was anything disrespectful in there. And I asked a bunch of people who read it, because what I was saying was exactly what you said,
Right.
was that I believe that Charles Leland went to Tuscany and he observed the religious ceremonies of the Tuscan witches. And just like you would go to an Episcopalian church or a Catholic church and you might find a priest celebrating the Mass, and you might find nuns sitting in the front row or in the choir. Not everybody who's in that church and not everybody who's Catholic is a priest or a nun. And so when you go and observe a boschetto or a grove, a coven, it may be led by a witch, but there were other people that were there. And that's the religion of Diana, the religion of Dianus. So I could see where Leland would think that was one and the same as witchcraft, but he didn't get to see that the folk magic side is not talked about and it's secretive. And it doesn't mean that, now that we understand that he might have misinterpreted that, it doesn't make him a horrible person or even a bad folklorist, because we're all doing the best that we can. And it doesn't mean that, Raven Grimassi, who created an entire religion of Stregoria around Charles Leland's work, so now that we understand that might not actually have been his work, might not have been accurate, it doesn't mean that what Raven created was anything other than beautiful and expressive and personal. And so thank you for that, because our ancestors never had to be perfect, including the luminary ancestors of the craft. Because who cares if what they created even if they pulled it out of thin air. If it was authentic and real for them, then we need to start respecting that. We need to
Well,
say, I
even
can come from a different place than you, but it doesn't mean that I don't respect you and love you for who you are.
exactly. So, um, Robert Cochrane, who kind of brought the traditional craft back in the 60s, he was asked by one of his students, what constitutes a witch? Like, do you have to have initiations, or can you be um, a self dedicant? And he says, if you call the spirits and they come, and you're a witch, and it's quite that simple. I think initiations are great. I think to have a lineage is great because through that you'll have teachers and you'll have the egregor of that spiritual tradition to help you and train you in dreams and through journeys and meditation. But if you go out and you work with the trees and the ancestors and the stars, I think you're fine. Um, again, initiations are great because they come with some teachers, you know. And I mean, and now you also have to remember when this whole idea happened about initiations and things like that, and they didn't have Amazon, they didn't have the bookstores, so you had to have the teachers. Um, and and people learn differently. And I'm a fan of having several different teachers. Like for example, I have a teacher who teaches me Lakota. I have a teacher who teaches me ceremonial magic. I have a teacher who's taught the runes to me. My priestcraft, my traditional craft, they're all a different teacher, and I learn different things and different styles and things from them. We also learn from our teachers in books. Um, we learn from authors, and I'm always saying, read several authors about the same thing to get a different perspective, and that way, because I know there's this whole thing about you shouldn't be able to pick and choose your spirituality like a buffet, and I say, why not? I do it all the time. If I don't like something, I don't do it, and sometimes I don't like something, and 5 years I'll decide, oh, I do like it after all. Can I go back and forth? So, basically, you call the spirits, you call the elements, you call whatever, and it happens. There you go, all good.
And you said that it's really good to that you feel that it's good to have teachers, and
Yeah,
I think one of the reasons why that resonates with so many people is because when we're doing our ancestral work, working with the ancestors whom we already have an intimate relationship with, who we already
right,
understand. For the person who feels more called to nature and to more of an animist kind of an experience, which is personally a very big part of my spiritual path. I wouldn't understand how to listen and I didn't understand how to listen to the trees and the plants and the water and the elements right off the bat. I had
right,
to learn that
right,
language, but I didn't have to go very far when my grandmother taught me to work with the ancestors because
mhm,
I understood that language. And
right,
so that relationship, even if it's a in the Hindu tradition, we say that you have a guru and you have a parama guru or a sat guru, the high guru, but you also have what they call upa gurus, which are the gurus along the way.
yeah,
And so when
absolutely,
we open ourselves to those teachers along the way, I know I hear you when you say that people criticize you for the buffet approach, but I go with Auntie Mame on that one. Life is a buffet, and that's the
right,
only way you get to find what your favorite foods are, is by picking and choosing and seeing what resonates with you and what doesn't. And I would just encourage our viewers, especially the younger viewers that are new to the path, and I don't just mean younger in terms of age, I mean younger in terms of being on the path. Um, if you find something that doesn't resonate with you, great. Just consider that to be a gift. You know that it doesn't resonate with you, but please don't feel like you have to attack it. You can say, this doesn't resonate with me and why. That I have got to put this up on the screen. Our brother says, don't get Pocahontas on me now.
I don't know what that means. I don't get it.
when when we're talking about my thought is that he's talking about getting being 45 attacking Elizabeth Warren, that we're going to become Princess Rain in the face, or touchy. And for Landes, I might be completely off base in interpreting what you mean. I just thought it was funny no matter what. I think that that we can pick and choose what works for us. We don't have to criticize or condemn the things that don't work for us. We can be expressive, we can be honest about it, and share, hey, this doesn't work for me because,
Right.
or I don't. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and I said, no, I don't think that that we are forced to accept that Halloween and Samhain are the same thing, because they're not. But we can agree to disagree. Huh?
I have thoughts
Good.
about that.
Well, let's talk about it.
So how I was trained in traditional witchcraft, it's like, you know how they say the 12 days of Christmas, so you have a Yule, a tide, so it doesn't mean it's only one and day. It has a few days or a week or even 2 weeks. So that's how I feel about all the holidays. So for Samhain, for me, energies they start to get stronger around the 27th, 28th, and they peak around the 31st, the 1st, the 2nd. Then they start to taper off around the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So I think the energy, like the veil, it opens through like a week or two, and then it starts to close. So if somebody wants to honor October 31st or November 1st or the 2nd or the astrological day, I think that's fine. The other thing they need to understand is ancient people, they didn't necessarily celebrate an astrological day per se. Perhaps some of them did. We know that the Druids probably, and I say probably because I didn't write anything down, so we're only using conjecture. But the Druids probably did the full moon that was closest to Samhain. So it could have been November 8th, or it could have been October 23rd. It was whatever the full moon was at that time.
But see, we do know that 5,000 years ago, that in the Celtic lands, that there were places like Stonehenge where they arranged the stones so that on a specific date, when the sun was at a specific degree,
They did
that was when they celebrated. And
they did that for Yule and summer solstice, but Samhain.
They did it for Samhain as well. Actually, I posted about that on my wall.
I haven't seen it. I want to see it because I haven't seen anything. I would love to see it because everything that I've seen has been about the solstices and
right,
like that.
Well, it's because it's a cross-quarter day. It was easy for them to. It was important for them to mark it. So it was literally because the dates would shift within like 3 or 4 days either way. What was really fascinating to me, and this is when I take off my witch hat and I put on the anthropologist nerd hat, was that it's fascinating that at the same time that the Celtic peoples were celebrating Samhain on the cross-quarter day, in India, they were celebrating on that same day, Diwali.
Mhm.
And in Rome and the Etruscan lands, they celebrated this is our like a lead into your book again.
Yeah.
They celebrated the removal of the stone that supposedly was the portal to the underworld. And it always falls around the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th of November.
Mhm.
But that doesn't, just because though we know that anthropologically and historically and archaeologically, doesn't mean that the celebrations of neo-pagans who decided, for whatever reason, like you said, we know that it's a process of the veil, the doors opening and the doors closing. And I kind of think, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, that when the doors open and when the doors close, that's really for the practitioner to decide. They don't get to change or edit history. They don't get to discredit things that we know historically and
Mhm.
especially scientifically. We know the movement of the stars and all that.
Right.
But so what? Because if for you the doors begin to open on the 27th and someone else says, well, I don't feel that. I feel it opening on the 23rd, or I feel it opening on November 3rd, or whatever. Great. Then work with
Yeah.
what you got, because
Yeah.
your ancestors are not going to let you down. They're not going to take you down the wrong path.
So
And I think it keeps us away from cultural appropriation anyway, because I'm not Celtic. So, like, I really don't have any skin in the game as to when the Celts celebrated anything. I know when my people did.
well, the other thing we have to remember is that the ancestors are here all the time, and we're able to talk to them all the time. It's just easier around Samhain. It's easier, and I mean, if we think about it, why October? Why November? Well, we thinking about, especially in the Celtic countries and the northern European countries, the leaves started to fall, the crops started to die. So, oh, look, everything's dying and turning brown. It must be the time of the dead. Well, so what that means, and we have to also remember, as above, so below. So what happens on the physical plane is also happening in the spiritual plane. So if our leaves are falling, if it's getting colder, if things have the perception of dying, as in the plants, the flowers, and so forth, so that means the veil is probably getting a little bit thinner and thinner and thinner. And in Chicago here, I always laugh because all through October, it's 65 degrees, even foot dips down to 55. November 1st, I swear to God, every year it drops down to 35, 40 degrees. You can set your watch by it. So that to me, he says, okay, the energies are getting energies of death, energies of the ancestors are getting stronger, because at that point the veil is at its thinnest. And to be honest, how I like in my private circles and the things I do, I usually ask the guys. I say, "Hey, astrological Samhain's on the 7th of November this year. Samhain, I'd say proper, but Samhain proper is on Thursday. Which is easier for you guys to get together?" And that's when we get together.
Yeah.
Because it really doesn't matter as long as you have the time area. If you want to do it again, if you want to do it on the 31st or November 1st or November 7th, it doesn't matter. Just honor the ancestors, work with the ancestors, have fun, work with the fae, work with the elves, all the crazy hobgoblins that come out, and enjoy all that too.
Yeah.
It is a fun time of year, so enjoy it.
And do it or don't. It's up to you.
Right.
I want to talk about something a little more serious
Okay,
for a few minutes, if we could.
sure.
I mean, we could talk about this all night, but I think that another really important facet of your book, and there are so many things in your book, and again, for those that might have tuned in late, it's deeper into the underworld, and one of there are so many things that you talk about that just really moved me. That talking about healing your ancestors
Yeah,
is important, but you also do an amazing job, I think, of talking about death and
yeah,
how death is perceived in various cultures. And you did it in a way that I think was so respectful. A couple weeks ago, we talked on the show about cultural appropriation
hmm,
and how we need to the path that Kai Armand spoke so beautifully about. The path to healing that cultural appropriation is to actually become more intimate with and heal your own ancestry, and then begin to explore your ancestry. And I couldn't help but think as I was reading that number one, you did such a beautiful job of being respectful to other cultures, not appropriating, but really giving us a greater sense of what the traditions are, and some of the sacred mythos, and the legends and stories of those cultures. And what came to mind for me was, for LGBTQ persons, especially those of us that are over the age of 40, I'd say, um, there's a whole body of ancestors, those who perished from the AIDS pandemic, who, especially at this time of year, that connection with them and the desire to connect with them, and the truth of their really being ancestors with us, about as close, I'll say in two ways, as close to blood as they can get. But when you
right.
really look at the metaphysics of it, because of the nature of AIDS itself, for many of us, those are ancestors of blood, literally,
Mm,
because of their
mm,
modes of transmission. And so there is an energetic connection there that's just as palpable and deep, and abiding for me personally as my blood relatives. And I first just wanted to just thank you, for what you wrote, because it brought me to that point of really, having a really fulsome sense of that. Because my thoughts a lot of the time were, "Yeah, I'm not going to get involved in the arguments over when Stalin is, because I work with the ancestors all year round. This is
fine,
just a
right.
nice time set aside." But then I read your book and was like, you know what? This year at Samhain, I'm going to change up the altar a little bit and bring a little bit more remembrance. I don't necessarily use pictures or things that belong to all of the ancestors, individually. I also use some symbolism on my altars. And talk, if you would, a little bit about the importance, the reason that working with these types of ancestors for us as a LGBTQ community especially can be cathartic and heart
Mhm.
wrenching, but
Okay.
also an edifying part of our journey moving forward.
So that's a very interesting question, and the the queer pagan spiritual group that I belong to, the Fellowship of the Phoenix, we actually talk about this all the time, especially at at Samhain, about the queer ancestors and things like that. Um, I've actually taught many workshops about the queer spirituality from like the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, and so forth. So it's interesting because in our society, especially um, for people, so I graduated high school in 1993. So when I was coming of age, we were just starting to make some public um, progress. I know in the 70s and in the 80s, a lot of things happened, but I remember it was one of the first times that people would hear it's starting to be okay. And we still had a long ways to go. Remember that. I think for a whole lot of people, I mean, I was actually blessed because I never had to come out per se. I mean, part of it is I was on the track team and the drama club and the glee club, so they kind of they kind of knew I was gay. So it was never like, oh, guess what? I'm gay. They were like, oh, okay, whatever. Um, but for some people, they didn't have that, so they were either lost to their family or was kicked out of the home, or for some people, I remember friends telling me this, they were still loved as people, but they weren't loved as gay people. So, like, for example, you couldn't bring your partner home. You couldn't talk about what you were going through as a gay person, um, as a gay man or a gay female or bisexual or what have you. You had to keep it separate. So I think what happens is that there's a disconnect. So we feel like, oh, our family doesn't care about us, our family doesn't respect us, they don't care about the real us, as long as we put up perceptions at family gatherings. So there's a disconnect. I think with ancestor work and ancestor healing, and the ancestor healing goes both ways. We heal them, they heal us. You know, um, when we reconnect to our ancestors, I think it reconstitutes um, that energy of love, of being connected, of being part of our tribe. Um, even though I say that you don't have to honor your blood ancestors, it's my hope that one day you start to heal that process. If everybody's it's completely different. I'm kind of ballsy and I'm all gung ho, and I mean I like the direct approach, and so I'm not afraid to tell my ancestors, hey, suck it up. I'm gay. You're gonna have to get over it. Because at the end of the day, as well, you're in control of your ancestral altar. So if your ancestors don't want the offerings and don't want the energy and don't want to have a connection, fine, I can take them off. Um, Luckily, I haven't had to do that. Um, One thing to remember about our ancestors is just because you're just because you're dead doesn't mean you're a Buddha and enlightened. It just means you took off the clothes of your physical form, and you still have your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your prejudices, and so forth. That being said, all of my teachers have always said that on the spiritual plane, I'm laughing because I see Mr. Jones sing, "Say it loud, I'm gay and proud." Awesome, I love it. Um, Now I lost my train of thought because I was just so happy about
So
that.
on the spiritual plane, even though
Oh yeah, yeah. So on the spiritual plane, we have um, ascended ancestors and divine ancestors, our gods, our healing spirits, guardian angels, healing helpers, and so forth, who actually teach us to evolve and grow and things move like that. So you may have an ancestor who wasn't that spiritually evolved in the 1700s, but it's been 300 years. So I'm sure unless they made a choice not to receive those teachings from the spirit helpers, they probably evolved a little bit um, more. And again, ancestors have their own spiritual paths. So some evolve very quickly, some don't. You
And
know,
there's nothing that says that when you're working with a particular ancestor who has not yet evolved to that point, if it becomes difficult or you just have had enough, there's nothing that you can't say to another ancestor. Hey, you handle them. I'm done for now.
so
You know,
normally how I handle it, how I was always taught to handle it, is that I have a conversation, just like I would have a conversation with someone who's in a physical form. I would say, okay, um, if you want to be on the altar, if you want the offerings, and they do, if you want the prayers and if you want the energy, you're gonna have to be respectful. If you can't do that, I can take you off. So I do have a conversation. I'm not gonna say things like, "Oh, you pissed me off. Okay, I'm done with you," because that's not healing. A conversation is more healing, and And I have found that one of the ancestors on your altar is usually the or take charge and the one who talks to you a lot. Like, for example, my grandmother on my altar, she talks all the time. My great grandmother talks all the time too. My great grandfather, but not so much, but sometimes. And so usually I found in my practice, and maybe for someone else it's completely different and unique to them, but for myself, I find that there's always an ancestor or two is kind of like in charge, or the person who like is a more vocal one. So when that happens, I do say, "Hey, great grandmother," and she's like, "You said, can you talk to so and so because they're kind of getting on my nerves here a little bit, you know?" And does it always help? I haven't had a whole lot of problems, so I haven't had to do that very often. So
Yeah, I think my experience too has been that the ancestors are, by the time they've become ancestors, hopefully they are recognizing that need for intimacy and to kind of fix the things that we maybe didn't do while they were here, or while they were here they didn't do
right.
with their time, their particular era. Chris, I just want to thank you, folks. The book is called Deeper into the Underworld: Death, Ancestors, and Magical Rites. The author is Chris Allaun. Chris, it is always a pleasure. Like I said, you practically interview yourself and give
I
and
take
just bring
charge.
the value. You bring the value. That's the important part. There are lots of people who kind of try to take over the interview, but then they go off on tangents,
Oh, I
and
do
the
that too.
hardest thing to do is to try and look interested when somebody's doing that. You actually
You're
stay
so
focused and you bring the value. So thank you so much.
thank you.
We'll look forward to having you on again. If you wouldn't mind, when we jump off of here, in a second, I'll put you back into the green room. You could, in the comments, go ahead and put a link to the book, or a link
Sure,
to your
yeah, I can do
website,
that
or
right now.
whatever, so folks have a way of getting in touch with you. And then this will, as Chris and I were talking about it before the show, it will go on to Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify Podcasts, and it's being simulcast tonight for the first time between Facebook and YouTube. So we'll see if that actually worked and how it worked. And if you're watching us on YouTube, welcome to the 21st century. We're finally getting things moving along. And so, Chris, I want to thank you. And thank you for staying so long too.
Oh my God, it's my pleasure. I'd like to talk about the ancestors. My favorite.
Good. Well, we'll have you on again.
Okay.
And guys, for those of you that are maybe new to the program, I also want to make sure that we let you know that the course that I usually do every year, that I usually start right around Samhain, is a course that's called A Year of Thinking Magically. And in years past, we've done this for Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies, where they would pay $4,000, $5,000, depending on the size of the company. And I would spend 15, 20 minutes, a day or so, with their staff. Usually it was just their management. But I also offered this to private clients, at $900 a year, where I would coach them every day on one shift, one private shift that they could make in their own lives, to sort of deepen their journey, whether that's in business and relationships, financially, spiritually, physically. And I'm really excited because this year I decided it was really time for me to give back. It's been a phenomenal year for me, and so we are making this course that's usually $1,000 a person available for free. And if you're interested in that, you can actually go to the blog to inneralchemy.online. You'll see, I don't know, I think it's this side. You'll see the banner down at the bottom right there. And then in order to join the group, to become part of the process, it'll take you about 10 minutes a day, maybe 15 minutes a day. And I promise you, it's an exciting and fun journey that we take together. You can actually look in the blog there. You'll see a link that says the Alchemist blog. There is a post in there for the A Year of Thinking Magically Masterclass. And in that article, there's a link that'll take you right into the Facebook group. And I go through that group once a day and approve folks. The cutoff for joining that group will be the day before Halloween. So on the 30th of October, we're going to cut off enrollments, and then you won't be able to join again until this time next year. And Chris, if you can still hear me, you want to put those not in the private chat, but you want to put them on those links in the Facebook on the Facebook post itself, or I could do it for you now that you've put them there for me. And ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, thanks so much for joining us. This is the first time that we're doing this at a later time, so that more folks have an opportunity to tune in and catch it first thing in the morning on the replay. And as we say at the end of every show, I encourage you, if you got value from this, to share this and like and subscribe and do all that stuff. But more importantly, to return to the moment and bring gratitude to that moment. Consider some of the things that our guest Chris shared with you tonight, and let that gratitude open the door for the things that are waiting for the abundance and the connections and the intimacy with the ancestors. And always remember, the best is yet to come. We'll talk to you soon. Good night.